Week 2 of college football, a lot of really underrated matchups to predict, and my weekly pick's doing pretty good. Hoping to continue a pretty strong streak here in the first 2 weeks. We're still early. First 2 weeks have went well. We're going to talk about Iowa State. I'll give you my prediction for the game, including an exact score. The line is very tight right now. Didn't expect that heading into week 1, but after an abysmal offensive performance by the Hawkeyes and a strong showing for the Cyclones, what you get for the Cyhawk series, and I guess we wouldn't want it any other way. We start out, though, not in the Cyhawk series, but with Arkansas and South Carolina, battle of two SEC teams. South Carolina with Spencer Rattler, who struggled at times last week. South Carolina got the job done. I like Arkansas straight up in this game. They are favored by 8.5. I'll take the Razorbacks to cover the number at home. Oregon State and Fresno State. This is a pick 'em. Oregon State winning last week. Fresno State doing the same thing. This is a tricky one going down to Fresno for a weird road game. And Fresno, they tend to get these home games against Power 5 opponents, and sometimes they surprise people. I do think Oregon State wins this game, and so of course they will cover that spread. It is, again, it's a pick 'em as of right now. Missouri and Kansas State. Adrian Martinez and the Wildcats with a strong showing in week 1. I like Kansas State to win this matchup. They're favored by 7.5. I like Kansas State by a touchdown. Mizzou covers the spread, but the Wildcats get the job done. Alabama and Texas, another battle of two very interesting quarterbacks with Quinn Ewers, of course, at Texas, and Heisman winner Bryce Young at Alabama. We saw Alabama just absolutely steamroll a good Utah State Aggies team last week. As soon as you start thinking that Bama can't cover a spread, they do. They're on the road in Austin taking on the Longhorns, and the Crimson Tide are 20.5-point favorites. This could go one of two ways. Either Alabama has kind of, I wouldn't say run the jar empty or run the tank dry, because I don't think that's possible in the Nick Saban system. But to some extent, could they let the foot off the gas a bit coming off a beatdown of a good opponent? I don't think so. I don't think you do that on the road at Texas. I think Saban will have these guys ready. I think they cover the 20.5-point spread. I'm just not going to fall for this one. I'm not going to fall for the Bama trap again. I like Alabama to cover the 20.5, and maybe they win by 10 to 15 points. I think they win fairly comfortably, and I think they can cover that 20.5. Wazoo and Wisconsin, pretty interesting Pac-12 Big Ten matchup here. Wisconsin, the 17.5-point favorites. I cannot take Wisconsin, who struggled offensively all of last year, and I think they're going to continue to have some of the same struggles, albeit with a better rushing attack. Just another year of age for some of those offensive linemen. They were a bit young up front last year at certain places, and they still got some youth there, but Braylon Allen's a year older, and we know Paul Chris' reputation for strong offensive lines. I think Braylon Allen's going to run just fine against a average to below average Cougar defense. I think Wisconsin wins this game, but I think Wazoo covers 17.5. Tennessee and Pittsburgh. We, of course, know Keaton Slovis, the new Pitt Panther quarterback, narrowly escaping JT Daniels and the West Virginia Mountaineers. I was a little underwhelmed by that performance last week, but I do like Pittsburgh at home. I know Tennessee's the trendy pick. They're 6.5-point favorites. I think Pittsburgh covers that number. I think they win it straight up. I take Pittsburgh in both categories. Kentucky and Florida. We know Florida with the big upset of Utah already this year. Kentucky always is the kind of underrated dark horse SEC team that nobody talks about. They schedule a really weak non-conference and get to a bowl game, but they're very well coached under Mark Stoops. I like Kentucky to win this game. Florida, again, the trendy pick because of that win against Utah. I think they have a kind of a down showing here against the Wildcats. Kentucky wins this game and upsets the Gators. And frankly, I don't see any reason why Kentucky shouldn't win this game. And honestly, yeah, they're on the road, and Utah ran into some problems, but I think it's going to be hard to repeat that back-to-back. I like the Wildcats. USC and Stanford. USC, the 8.5-point favorites. This is a road game. I like Stanford actually to cover the number. USC will win this game straight up, but I think it's going to be a one-possession game. USC, the 8.5-point favorites. Oklahoma State scored a ton of points last week and won, and that's what they do. That's kind of the reputation of the Big 12, right? I mean, Iowa State's a good defensive team, and the Big 12 has been able to shift that narrative over recent time, but still, Oklahoma State does not help the cause defensively for the conference. I do think Arizona State's going to have problems defending. the high-octane offense of the Cowboys. I'd like Oklahoma State to win this game straight up. They'll cover the 11.5 simply because of the high volume of points. I would certainly count on them being able to cover that number. A future Big 12 matchup between BYU and Baylor. I like BYU to win and to cover. They're 3.5-point favorites at home. That's a tough place to play going on the road to Provo. I like BYU in this one. And then finally, Mississippi State and Arizona. Mississippi State, 10.5-point favorites. They scored points last week, which did not surprise me. I think they do it again this week. I'm going to count on that SEC offense to not only win on the road in Tucson, which is a tough thing to do. Iowa fans know all about going on the road to Tucson, but I think they'll cover the 10.5 and win. And so finally, we get to the Cyhawk series, the game that is widely hyped every year. It's one of the most interesting rivalries in sports. It's kind of one of the more underrated rivalries nationally. Iowa fans, Iowa State fans, once you get to that game, Cyhawk week is heated. This year, maybe I'm just not in touch with, the community at large, but man, it just doesn't seem like there's nearly as much emotion behind this one. I don't think Iowa State fans really thought they had a legitimate shot to win this game. If you ask them heading into the season in Kinnick, without Brock Purdy, without Breece Hall, but now there's some life for Cyclone fans. Iowa struggling offensively in game one. Defensively, Iowa was really good, and Hunter Dekkers is going to have problems. I talked about that in my game preview. If you missed my game preview, posted it earlier today on the channel. I like Iowa to win, and I like Iowa to cover. They're 3.5-point favorites. I think, if anything, you use that as motivation because heading into the season, I would have anticipated Iowa to be at least 7 to 8-point favorites. But Vegas banking on the low-octane offense of the Hawkeyes to keep this thing close. And I think home field advantage too much for Hunter Dekkers to get him in that north end zone. I think Torrey Taylor is going to have a big day. I think they'll generate points, folks. I do not believe it's going to be another 10-7 game. If it is, I don't know what to say. Maybe you get a defensive touchdown in there. You mix in maybe a nice kick return that sets up a short field for the offense. I think the offense will score a couple touchdowns in this game. At home, a lot of pressure on Brian Ferentz. I'll say this, folks. Here's my bold prediction. If Spencer Petras is struggling at halftime, I think Alex Padilla goes in the second half. I really do believe that at this point. I think there's too much pressure on Brian Ferentz and Kirk Ferentz. We saw a different Brian during his press conference this week, a Brian that was holding Spencer Petras accountable, at least in the public eye, more than he ever has. I think Iowa makes that change if they need to at halftime. I like the Hawkeyes straight up. We'll say 26-21. They'll get to 26 somehow. They'll cover the number. Maybe it's a safety and a field goal in there, plus 3 touchdowns, 1 on defense, 1 with a short field, and 1 really impressive drive. Remember, Spencer Petras had a good second quarter against the Cyclones last year in Cyclone Stadium. So we'll see what happens. The Hawkeyes and the Cyclones. That game, of course, 3 p.m. Central Time on BTN. We'll be with you live for Iowa Postgame with Coach Don Patterson following the game right here from the Hawkeye of the Storm on YouTube. That's Iowa Postgame with Coach Don Patterson.